Imagine a world where young military officers in their mid-30s rise up and overthrow corrupt governments, where old puppet rulers backed by foreign powers are swept away, and where the most powerful nations in the West suddenly lose sleep at night. This is not a movie, this is today's Africa. 4 decades Africa's story was written by dictators, corrupt elites, and regimes installed or protected by colonial powers. But now a new chapter is unfolding, written not by the old guard but by a new generation of leaders, men in their 30s and early 40s who refuse to sell out, who refuse to hand over their country's resources for cheap, and who are willing to fight for their people. And the biggest question is, why is the West so afraid of them? The answer is simple. Because these leaders do not play by the old rules. They do not bow to Paris, London, or Washington. They look their people in the eye and say, our gold, our uranium, our oil, our land, belongs to us. And that message terrifies the very system that has depended on African resources for centuries. Take the example of Burkina Faso's young president, Ibrahim Traoré. At only 36 years old, he stood up inside the military and toppled an entire government. Within months, he expelled French troops and ordered foreign military bases out of the country. He promised his people that from now on, the wealth of Burkina Faso would serve Burkina Faso first, not Western corporations. And how did the West react? Outward silence, but inside, panic. International media outlets rushed to paint him as a dangerous populist, a dictator in the making, someone who would destabilize the region. But on the ground his people hailed him as their modern-day Che Guevara, a revolutionary hero who dared to do what older leaders never could. Right next door in Mali, Assimi Goïta rose as another symbol of this new African spirit. He too expelled French troops, broke away from decades of military dependency, and declared boldly, Africa is not for sale. Unlike his predecessors, he placed trust in his own army and sought new alliances, even with powers that the West despises. But more than that, Goïta spoke of unity, of breaking the colonial borders that divided Africa. And this is what made Western strategists nervous. If this idea spreads, if African nations begin to stand together, the entire balance of global power will shift. And then came Niger. A country most of the world barely noticed until its young officers stormed the presidential palace and seized power. Why did this shake France so badly? Because Niger holds some of the largest uranium reserves in the world, uranium that literally keeps French nuclear power plants running. 4 years, France's electricity has been powered by Niger's resources, while Niger itself remained one of the poorest countries on earth. But suddenly, the officers of Niger said enough. They cut ties with Paris, and overnight France found itself staring into darkness, quite literally. On French TV, commentators screamed that democracy was under threat in Niger. But the real fear in Paris was not democracy. It was that their lights might go out. Oh, understand these young leaders. We must remember a man from the 1980s, Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary president of Burkina Faso. He once said, "He who feeds you, controls you." He refused loans from the IMF and the World Bank, insisting his country must rely on its own resources. He spoke of African pride, African independence, and the end of neo-colonialism. And what happened to him? He was assassinated in a plot that many believe had foreign fingerprints all over it. Sankara's dream was killed, but not destroyed. Today, leaders like Traoré and Goïta are reviving that dream, bringing it back stronger than ever. Why is the West so desperate to label them dictators? Why the sanctions, the pressure, the threats? Because the Western economic engine is powered by Africa's raw materials: gold, uranium, cocoa, oil, and more. If Africa takes back control of these resources, industries in Europe and America will tremble, banks will panic, even militaries will struggle to maintain their supply chains. The young African leaders are not just changing their nations, they are threatening the very foundation of Western dominance. But this is only the beginning. The real fear begins when these leaders start to talk not just about their own countries, but about building a united Africa. Imagine a continent where the borders drawn by colonial powers mean nothing, where young presidents and generals work together, share resources, and create a new alliance independent of the West. Could the old powers tolerate such a future? Or will they try once again to crush these leaders, just as they crushed Sankara decades ago? This is the question that will define the coming years. And the answer lies in the story that unfolds next as the dust settles in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Something even more powerful begins to take shape. For the first time in modern history, young African leaders are not just rising in isolation, They are linking arms, building alliances, and daring to imagine a continent that is no longer a pawn of the West. This is what terrifies Washington, Paris, and London the most. A single revolutionary leader can be assassinated, but a united front of nations led by fearless young men is a force much harder to destroy. The idea of unity has haunted the West since the days of Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana, who dreamed of a United States of Africa. Back then, Nkrumah's dream was crushed by coups, manipulation, and foreign interference. But today, the same spirit is rising again in the Sahel, the heart of Africa, where Ibrahim Traoré, Assimi Goïta, and the officers of Niger are forging what they call an alliance of Sahel states. This alliance is not just a military pact, it is a declaration of independence from centuries of exploitation. It is a warning to the West: Africa is waking up. When Traoré stood beside Goïta and Niger's leaders, the symbolism was unmistakable. Three nations, side by side, refusing to bow. Their flags flew together, their soldiers marched together, their voices echoed with one demand: sovereignty. And behind closed doors, the West panicked. Think tanks in Washington published reports calling it a dangerous trend. French officials muttered about instability. But the truth was clear. Africa's young lions were no longer playing the old colonial game. The center of this alliance is the resource question. For decades, Africa's wealth has flowed outward. Gold to Europe, uranium to France, oil to America, cocoa to multinational corporations, while the people remained poor. These young leaders understand something their elders often ignored. Whoever controls the resources controls the future. That is why Traoré speaks openly about building state-owned companies to mine Burkina Faso's gold. That is why Mali is negotiating directly with new partners, bypassing Western corporations. That is why Niger has cut off uranium exports to France. And the West knows, if more countries follow this path, their economic dominance will crumble. The Western narrative, of course, is different. On international television, experts warn of dictators rising in Africa, of democracy dying, of instability spreading. But ask the people in Ouagadougou, in Bamako, in Niamey, and they will tell you something else. They will tell you that for the first time in their lives, they feel proud of their leaders. They will tell you that they finally see men who do not steal wealth to buy mansions in Europe, but who stand in the sun with the people, promising to fight for dignity. They will tell you that democracy means nothing when it only serves foreign interests. But history has taught us that when African leaders challenge the system strikes back. We saw it with Patrice Lumumba in Congo, killed within months of independence. We saw it with Sankara in Burkina Faso, shot down in a coup. We saw it with Gaddafi in Libya, bombed out of existence when he tried to create a Pan-African currency backed by gold. So the question hangs heavy in the air. Will the West let these young leaders survive? Or are they already plotting the next intervention? Behind the scenes, the chess game has already begun. Reports emerge of secret meetings, of Western envoys flying quietly into African capitals, offering deals, issuing threats. Sanctions are slapped on Niger. Aid is cut off to Mali. Diplomats warn Burkina Faso of isolation. But instead of breaking, the alliance grows stronger. Traoré answers sanctions by calling for self-reliance. Goïta responds to pressure by deepening military ties with his neighbors. Niger's officers stand firm, declaring they would rather eat grass than return to French domination. For the first time, sanctions seem to be uniting Africa instead of dividing it. The West, desperate, plays its old card, fear. They warn of terrorism, of instability, of Russia's influence. They tell the world that Africa is falling under the sway of dangerous powers. But ordinary Africans see the hypocrisy. For years, French troops occupied the Sahel, yet terrorism only grew. Billions in aid poured in, yet poverty remained. Now, when young leaders take control, suddenly the West cries foul. The people are asking, who really created the chaos in the first place? In the markets of Ouagadougou, in the villages of Mali, in the deserts of Niger, the mood is changing. Young men carry portraits of Traoré. Women sing songs about freedom. Flags of Russia and Burkina Faso fly side by side, not because Africans want to be dominated by Moscow, but because they are tired of being dominated by Paris. For them, the choice is simple. Anyone who respects Africa's sovereignty is welcome, anyone who treats Africa as a colony is not. And yet, even as hope rises, danger lurks. The CIA has long operated in Africa. French intelligence is deeply entrenched. Coups and counter-coups have always been their tool. The fear is that the same playbook will be used again. Already rumors swirl of plots against Traoré. Anonymous sources whisper of assassination attempts. And every African who knows history wonders, will these young lions meet the same fate as Sankara and Lumumba? Or will they finally break the cycle? One thing is certain, the struggle has only just begun. The West cannot afford to lose Africa, but Africa can no longer afford to be lost. The clash is inevitable. The only question is who will outlast the other. But this story is far from over. The most explosive chapter lies ahead. Because the young African leaders are not just expelling troops and seizing resources, they are dreaming bigger. They are talking about a new African order, a federation of nations, a currency free from Western control. And if that dream becomes reality, the world as we know it will never be the same. What exactly are these plans? And how far will the West go to stop them? The answer lies in the next chapter of this story. The dream that is beginning to rise in Africa today is not a small one. It is not just about kicking out foreign troops or renegotiating mining contracts. It is something far greater, something that has terrified Western powers since the very birth of African independence. It is the dream of a united, sovereign Africa. An Africa that speaks with one voice, that controls its own destiny, and that refuses to be treated as the raw material supplier of the world. This is the dream the young lions are now daring to chase. Imagine a continent of 54 nations no longer divided by colonial borders, but bound together by a shared vision of independence. Imagine a common African defense force, able to protect its people without begging for foreign soldiers. Imagine an African currency backed by gold, oil, and minerals, free from the manipulation of the dollar, the euro, or the CFA franc. Imagine trade routes that connect Lagos to Nairobi, Dakar to Addis Ababa, without needing the permission of Paris or Washington. For the first time in centuries, this vision feels alive. And that is why the West is desperate to stop it before it grows. Already discussions are underway. In speeches across the Sahel, leaders like Ibrahim Traoré talk about a new federation, a future where Africa no longer dances to Western music. Assimi Goïta calls for collective sovereignty. Niger's officers declare that the age of colonial exploitation is over. These are not empty slogans. They are steps toward building a new reality. The alliance of Sahel states could be the seed of a wider African union, a union rooted not in weakness, but in strength. But history warns us, dreams like this invite enemies. The moment Muammar Gaddafi announced plans for a Pan-African gold-backed dinar, NATO jets bombed Libya into ruins. The moment Patrice Lumumba called for Congo's independence, he was silenced forever. The moment Sankara refused to bow to the IMF, bullets ended his life. The West does not forgive leaders who dare to rewrite the rules of the global order. And so the question is not whether they will try to stop Traoré, Goïta, and the rest. The question is how and when. Western playbooks are predictable. First, they launch propaganda, branding the leaders as dictators, authoritarians, enemies of democracy. Then they impose sanctions, cutting off aid and blocking access to financial markets. If that fails, they sponsor unrest, fund opposition groups, or quietly back coups. And if all else fails, they use military force, directly or through proxies. Africa has seen this cycle too many times. But this time, something feels different. This time, the people themselves are awake, and the streets of Ouagadougou, tens of thousands gather when Traoré speaks. In Bamako, crowds chant Goïta's name. In Niamey, the people march with their leaders, not against them. For the first time, the Western narrative is collapsing, because the African people no longer buy it. They know who has stolen their resources. They know who has kept them poor. And they know who finally dares to fight back. This people's awakening may be the real shield that protects the young lions. Yet even as hope spreads, challenges remain. Africa is vast and diverse. Not every leader is ready to risk confrontation with the West. Corruption still lingers in many capitals. Ethnic and religious divisions can be exploited. Foreign powers still wield enormous influence through debt, media, and military bases. The road to unity is long and dangerous. One misstep could fracture the fragile alliance. That is why the young leaders must move carefully, balancing boldness with strategy, courage with caution. But if they succeed, the consequences will shake the world. A united Africa controlling its own gold, uranium, oil, and rare earth minerals would no longer be a victim of exploitation. It would be a global superpower, able to negotiate on equal terms with America, Europe, China, or Russia. The dollar's dominance could collapse if Africa refused to trade in it. Western economies, built on cheap African resources, could face crisis. Global power would shift south, toward the continent long dismissed as poor and powerless. That is why the West sees these young leaders not just as rebels, but as existential threats. Oh, where does this story end? The truth is, it has no end yet. The struggle is unfolding right now. Every speech Traoré makes, every decision Goïta takes, every move Niger's officers attempt is shaping the future. The battle is not just about territory or trade. It is about history itself. Will Africa remain chained to the legacy of colonialism? Or will this generation finally break free and rise? The coming years will answer this. Perhaps the West will crush the movement as it has before, leaving another generation to mourn lost dreams. Or perhaps, for the first time, Africa's young lions will outsmart the empire, survive the plots, and light a fire that spreads across the continent. If that happens, the 21st century will not belong to America, or to Europe, or even to China. It will belong to Africa. And maybe, just maybe, when future generations look back, they will say this was the moment it all began. The moment young leaders, tired of humiliation, stood up and declared to the world, Africa is not for sale, Africa is not for conquest, Africa is for Africans. And in that moment, the world changed forever.